Hey there, Adrienne Elise here. Welcome to the Gaia Daily for April 28th, 29th. How are you doing? Well, we are coming to the end of an epic and quite disconcerting April 2020. And it just highlights this crazy time that we're in on the planet. And of course, it's also written in the stars. So, what are the messages telling us right now? It's almost like we're coming up out of a fog of the collective fear and kind of immobilization that happened from this trauma. And yet, how do we move forward, right? And it's like, oh, this desire to get back to normal, except for that it's got to be a new normal, right? It's almost like we've gone to places that we can't come back from. And there's really a lot of positives here, as well as an incredibly uncomfortable feeling of the unknown, right? Like, okay, so you're in quarantine, you're just kind of stuck. You just do what you're doing, right? You just get through. Then what happens when the gates open and you're being asked to get back to life? And yet we can feel that the world is shifting and that this situation isn't really, there's more to the story. And it's just this deep, uncomfortable feeling that we don't know who we are, we don't know where we're going, and how can we just get back into it, right? Now, this has to do with the fact that we've had over this last weekend, we had the sun in conjunction to Uranus, right? Now, the sun is who we think we are, and Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius. And so we're kind of being asked, it was kind of this flash of light coming through, right? Of like, if I try to orient myself to this daily soup of the collective, I'm never going to get bearings on my world and who I am, right? And so now we have Mercury has moved into Taurus and is coming into a conjunction with Uranus. And it's kind of bringing home. Now, on the one hand, Mercury is Mercury's a mutable sign. It represents our mind, our conceptual reality, how we're trying to make sense of things. Of course, it just went to this crazy places of going back and forth over Pisces and Aquarius, speaking to how to what we need to shift here in our perspective to move into the new age. Now in Taurus, Mercury's trying to find stability, right? Like Taurus is a fixed earth sign. So it's like, okay. And yet there is no stability, right? And but it's like now we're having a fallout energy of that sun Uranus, like, oh, yeah, no, I have a way bigger sense of who I am in this story. But then how do we integrate? How do we move forward? How do we step back out into the world as this bigger, truer self and still try to function in this time of just like immobilization, of the trauma, of the uncertainty? And so it's like Mercury's trying to grapple for some certainty, and this because of that sun Uranus and Mercury coming together with the sun next week. It's like the uncertainty has to do, the looking for stability has to do with who in the heck are we, right? So it's like a massive identity crisis, and it has to do with like, okay, cool, the situation, maybe we're going to get through this and then we can get back to normal, right? And it's like, ooh, no, I don't know, like it's got to be a new normal, right? Like, and we still don't know like what's really going on, as far as like in the bigger, wider truths of the shift and transition spiritually on our planet, physically on our planet, economically on our planet. It's just a big pot of unknown and uncertainty, and it's looming right now. This is the most uncomfortable place for humanity, is to not know, which is kind of the definition in a way, because but this has to do with the fact that, of course, we're starting to feel, I talked about yesterday, and I'm going to have a whole video about this Venus retrograde coming up, but Venus coming into the square with Neptune as she begins her retrograde. Very just so powerful and so intense, and just these deep, it's almost like while we were in the full lockdown, you just had to deal and you just had to do what you had to do, right? It's like, okay, so everything else is off the table. You just live your life, try to get through, right? And then once you try to get back to normal, like I was saying, and it's like this deep, uncomfortable uncertainty, unknown. And Venus represents like our day-to-day feelings of security and love and what matters to us, our value system. So Venus retrograde in a mutable sign, Gemini, and having three massive, a whole month we're feeling of square to Neptune, which is just total confusion, and it's like in these mutable signs, and Venus is what we care about. So it's speaking to like, this is the issue of us moving forward, is that we don't know what we want and who we are even, right? And so we don't know it's just everything's been turned upside down in our world. And so this is this Venus retrograde, and it has a lot to do with coming into truths and out of delusion. But sometimes you have to go deeper into delusion before you can come. Maybe that's what's going on. Maybe that's a bigger picture of what's happening in the collective consciousness. It's like we've been so lied to for so long about our true history, about the wider truth of our cosmos and beings that exist in other realms, and and like just so much of cures being kept from us, a dumbed down educational system. We've got all of these delusions, right? But as long as everything's cool and you got your personal computer in your hand and you've got your life and you're just living along, it's all cool, right? And now it's all just come crashing down. And so we have to, but it's almost like we're in this such a confusion place, and that's just going to continue and just continue to be uncomfortable. And the message for these souls is that you've been here, right? Like you know this confusion, this delusion, how weird it is to try to bridge this world with the wider, bigger spiritual truths. You've been here. You know that, you know what to do, right? But the collective, right? So that's the tricky part, is because the collective consciousness going through this, it's like phase 2 of this shift that we're in. And we had to deal with the fear, hysteria, trauma energy in the collective. Now it's like waking up out of that, being like, okay, confusion, delusion, and who am I and how do I move forward, right? And it's like, that's where you guys have been for years, right? Lifetimes. You've done this. Like, you got this. You know who you are in your bigger, wider spiritual self. Some part of you does, right? And that was kind of that message yesterday. Like, why not just go there? It doesn't mean it's easy. We're having like moment to moment battles right now between this very uncomfortable brewing feeling. But I think maybe that's the message for these souls. It's just like, no, this Venus retrograde, it's very uncomfortable feelings of the unknown, except for you're not scared of that. You've gone to these places. That's the collective going through it. Right? Like, this is an illusion of, this isn't all there is, It's like one little sliver of experiences that you've had as an advanced soul, So when you feel that feeling of foreboding and looming, like uncertainty, just be like, oh, that's the collective, right? But that's kind of the energy we're dealing with. And then square to Neptune, it's like Venus, it's like, oh man, like our sense of self, our sense of who, like what makes us feel good and who we are, our value system is in complete and total confusion right now. And that's a lot about like, no matter where people are in the spectrum of beliefs and political and all this, it's like, it's the playing field's getting completely leveled once we get more sense of the truths of what's really going on, and that humanity needs to come together and understand about this forces that have been fighting against our evolution since Atlantean time, old story. And because you've been on the front lines of this battle lifetime after lifetime. So here you are, right? And actually, we're so much further along as far as where we were even a few weeks or months ago. Because even though there's waves of pressure in the lower grid to try to pull you back into the lower dimensional frequencies, and you'll feel this as soon as you start feeling light and free, something will come along and be like, no, come on back down here with us, right? And this could be through people, it could be through situations, right? But we can sense that, no, we're actually doing it. We're getting somewhere. We are at that 100th monkey place. And what is required of us is in that moment, the power of that connection to source, of that connection to truth, the bigger, wider truth. So you got to take this uncertainty delusion energy and be like, oh yeah, I totally got this. And use this Neptune square Venus to step out of the collective soup and be like, yeah, I know this story. And use the Neptune energy, the square, the tension, to push yourself into the positive aspect of Pisces and Neptune confusion, which is like, oh yeah, this is a spiritual reality. There's this play going on in the manifest world, but first it's pure consciousness, like before anything else. And that's the truth of who we are. And we've got to like slip through the delusion wormhole. Like it's almost like you go to that deep into that place of uncertainty and uncomfortableness, and then slip through to that bigger, wider spiritual revelation. So not easy, but we're here together and we can do this. And so a full month of this Venus square Neptune for us to practice. But a lot of messages of like, you guys are doing it. You're doing it. Just keep with this program. And remember that you succeeding in your mission means you feel good. You feel light and free. You're allowing yourself joy, connection to nature, and that the play of the manifest reality is only going to get more dark and confused before it gets light. Right. And so we're also feeling, this is the last few days. So it's an interesting energy of all month long in and out of they never became exact in their trine, but Mars and Venus, Mars in Aquarius, Venus in Gemini. But it's like this, they've been dancing real close to this beautiful trine, and they don't come back into trine until September. So because Venus takes retrograde, Mars takes retrograde, there's a Mercury retrograde thrown in there. And so we've got this energy of the last few days of this, and this like coming out of the battle within and the battle of the other, and that's a lot of the Gemini energy. It's interesting that we've had a whole month of Venus trine Mars. And then now we're going to have Venus retrograde, Mars retrograde, and in Gemini, which is about overcoming that duality within and overcoming the, using duality to get back to a new perspective and getting back to a oneness. So that's kind of the energy of Gemini. And so Mercury is the ruler moving over into Taurus, is like looking for the stability, but then Uranus is there. And Uranus is like anything but stable. It's like, yeah, good. This is fine plasma technology, right? It's a different stability. Don't this earth like manifests blocks and stones of building of this world, not stable, right? And so we're kind of in that place of confusion. But so we've got Venus and Mars for the next couple of days in this sweet trine, and then Venus square Neptune. Mars is in an exact semi-sextile to Neptune. So just one sign over from Neptune. And that's like a harmony. It's very subtle, but it's also a harmonious thing. Like we can do this, like Pisces, Aquarius, we can do this, right? Like Mars is like, we can do this. Like, let's work together. Like underneath the delusions is the spiritual revelation. Like we can't get out of the Pisces age. And like first of all, the Pisces age, we've got to get out of the delusions and the lies. And who we thought we were as some lower life form, right? And who we thought we were as slaves of this bigger control energy, and who we thought we were as like separate little beings off in their own planet, not connected to the wider cosmos, all of that. And then, but there's also not just the completion of the delusions of the Piscean age, but the spiritual revelation, which has to do with the Christ consciousness, right? So the Piscean age was really about Christ consciousness and how that spiritual revelation had to go to the dark side, right? And be used to control us. And now we're coming out. And if we don't take the spiritual revelation with us, we can't get into the higher octave of the Aquarian age, right? And so that's maybe coming back to this message for you guys, for these souls, is to use this Venus square Neptune And maybe we're getting a hint of this energy of how to break through that, how to use this for our advantage. This is part of the energy, it came through yesterday too. It's like everything that's happening, we have to use to our advantage, right? And have like, okay, it's happening for us. These changes on the planet, as much as it looks like control, energy, and attack, it's like, oh, this is it's for our evolution. Everything in my life is working for me, because there's one point to your existence, and that's to get back to God and get back to who you really are. And so now we need to use the dark, uncertain confusion and deep insecurities that are coming up with this Venus retrograde. So, powerful opportunity for you to be that placeholder of the light in your community, even if it doesn't mean interacting with people. It's just hold space for this, that and the gift of the Neptune energy of like underneath the delusions is the spiritual revelation. And I keep trying to say spiritual revolution, apparently. And you're there on the front lines of this battle, claiming your permission to hold the light and be in the bigger, wider truth of who you are, that you don't know who you are. And that's coming back to this theme of like our identity crisis. So this next week, we've got Mercury coming into a conjunction with Uranus. That's going to peak out on Friday. And then we've got Mercury will come to the sun, and that peaks out next week. And that's an energy. So this whole next week is about this identity crisis, right? And like the fallout of that sun Uranus of like, oh, shit, like I'm not who I thought I was, and I can't move forward in the same way that I was. And who am I and what am I doing here? It's like, okay, well, we'll figure it out together. So thanks so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow for the next update. Until then, I'm Adrienne Elise. Namaste.